For the most part, MMA is a respectful sport. The competitors are lifelong martial artists. They shake hands, and after blooding each other up, they'll embrace and hug it out. But there is a handful of guys who are the total opposite of that. And two stand head and shoulders above the rest. The Diaz brothers.
He legitimately doesn't give a fuck. He smokes weed all the time. People love it. They love the fact that those guys are like that.
I know.
Whether it's choking people out on the street, fights in Las Vegas hotels, or full-on brawls on live TV, Nick and his younger brother Nate are always causing havoc wherever they go. And these are the times when the Diaz brothers got into wild altercations outside of the octagon. Before Khabib jumped the fence after beating Conor McGregor, there was one notorious brawl that happened in an MMA cage. I'm talking about the 2010 Strikeforce Nashville Brawl. To set the scene, Jake Shields had just defeated Dan Henderson to defend the Strikeforce middleweight title, and with Shields being part of the Cesar Gracie team, both the Diaz brothers and their teammates were in the cage to celebrate. But in the midst of his post-fight speech, a former opponent and fellow MMA wildman Jason Mayhem Miller somehow entered the cage to demand a rematch.
But Henderson's a true legend, man. I'm glad to have beaten him. He beat the crap out of the worst I've ever been beat that first round.
What's up? Where's my rematch, buddy?
If it was 99% of fighters, a few words would have exchanged, maybe a shove for the cameras, but in the Diaz world, that meant war. And Mayhem made the mistake of stepping into the cage alone with the Cesar Gracie team, who held 3 Strikeforce titles at the time. So after a couple of pushes, it was the older brother Nick who took the violence to the next level.
What's up? Where's my rematch, buddy?
Sometimes these things happen in MMA. A lot of testosterone in the cage. Gentlemen, we're on national television.
According to Mayhem, he targeted the first person he could just to save himself from the beating getting out of control.
I said, where's my rematch, buddy? And then it was just a nightmare.
Oh my
and
God.
if you notice right there, I double-leg Nate. I double-leg Nate because I know when you're getting jumped, you got to get somebody on the ground so you don't get fucked up. So you don't get stomped out.
It ended with Strikeforce pretty much losing their TV deal with CBS, and less than a year later, it was purchased by the UFC. We're not saying this is the reason Strikeforce went under, but it sure as anything didn't help their cause. And at the time, the Diaz brothers were getting a lot of flack for the incident. But if you knew anything about Nick and Nate, that wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone.
I believe the Diaz brothers are taking a lot of slack for this thing. Number one, Jake Shields pushed him first, and Gilbert Melendez was in the middle of that too. And let me ask anybody a question. Ask 1,000 people this question. Fight breaks out next to the Diaz brothers. What do you think's going to happen? Okay? Anybody? Is that a shock to anybody? Really, a fight broke out with the Diaz brothers' friends and they got involved? That's weird. Come on, give me a fucking break.
Because say what you will, the Diaz brothers will always defend one of their own.
What happened tonight, man?
That little bitch boy came in and tried to push my boy right after he's done fighting.
You want a shot at Mayhem?
And it's that same mentality this time from the younger brother Nate that left a guy unconscious on the street and later trying to sue him. It all went down after a Misfits boxing event in 2023 where Nate Diaz was celebrating a teammate's win and decided to hit the town after the show. And if you know anything about bars and nightclubs at the hourly hours of the morning, fights are all too common. A huge brawl broke out, punches were flying, people were dropping when some guy approached Nate Diaz of all people with his hands up in a non-aggressive way. And of course, it ended horribly for this individual.
Oh yeah! Dude, 12 up in there! Oh yeah, Logan!
The only benefit of the doubt would be that this guy had no idea who Nate Diaz was. But that's not true. Not only was this guy fully aware of Nate Diaz and his personality, apparently his friends were trash-talking Diaz's teammate while he was having his boxing match. So walking up on Nate in any capacity was a terrible idea.
I walked out of this bar and the whole street was fighting. I didn't even know who was fighting. I was like, oh shit. It was late, it's 2 in the morning. So I started running around to the other side of the street where I saw some of my other homies over there, and I started crossing the street. I'm looking, and then fake Logan Paul runs up in my face. like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm like, whoa, back the fuck up. And I grabbed him by his hands. Cause he's like, whoa, whoa, like, this fool's gonna hit me. He's like, I'm about to like back up. And he pushed into me. Fuck. And when he pushed into me, I had him in a headlock, and then the whole street was going crazy. Like, these fools are gonna fuck me up. So I choked his ass.
But the story is far from over there. After turning himself into the police and getting released on bond, Nate had a legal fight on his hands. The guy tried to sue Nate Diaz, claiming he had injuries to his neck, head, and even his brain.
I was all like, all right, so I walked up to him. I was like, hey, dude, calm down. Yeah, I would have bought him a drink. Okay, I did not think that he walks up to me, grabs both of my hands. I'm like, oh, dude, calm down. He grabs both my hands, tosses it down, throws a hook, lands on my jaw, pulls me down into a guillotine choke, but it's not like a basic guillotine choke. You know, your head's not right here, okay? His wrist was up tight, forcing the head into the solar plex, putting a deeper style choke, okay? Now, not only am I being choked out by Nate freaking Diaz, but I have two of Nate's friends. One of them's in the UFC, blast me in my ribs, okay? And by this point in time, I'm pretty sure I was already asleep. That choke was tight.
He also wanted compensation due to having lost the enjoyment of life, having suffered psychological distress, medical expenses, and lost income due to being unable to work.
I'm on the ground, the back of my head hits the street, I end up with 8 staples and a severe concussion. I am lucky to be alive.
Funnily enough, Nate Diaz's representative literally replied LOL to the threat, and the situation ended there. And if the guy looks somewhat familiar to you, he's actually an amateur MMA fighter who leans into being a Logan Paul doppelganger. According to Sherdog, the fighter, whose name is not Logan Paul, is 0-5 in MMA. You'd think that if you were an MMA fighter of any level, you'd 1. Know who Nate Diaz is, 2. Not walk at him in the midst of a brawl, and 3. Have slightly better guillotine defense than that. But that said, it is Nate Diaz after all. His jiu-jitsu game is pretty strong. And all the way back in 2002, a 17-year-old Nate Diaz taught a fighter much older and bigger than him that very same lesson. In a now iconic clip, which has almost 9 million views on YouTube, a teenage Diaz representing Team Gracie took on a guy who appeared to be in his 30s or 40s.
Robert, Ramon, Tihan, Nathan Diaz, Gracie. Ready? Let's play!
It looked to be some kind of unsanctioned gym versus gym fight, which wasn't unheard of in the early days of MMA. Despite everything seeming pretty respectful, Diaz still had the iconic Stockton slap even as a kid. After a little back and forth on the feet, Nate shot for a takedown. The older guy, who looked way bigger and stronger, jumped on a pretty decent guillotine, but Nate stayed calm, got to side control, and wasn't in any danger. And after getting mount, it was over within the blink of an eye. Throughout the fight, you can just about hear his older brother Nick shouting out some nuggets of wisdom, and you can even see him for a split second at the end of the video. It's claimed that this was Nate Diaz's first ever competitive MMA style fight, although it won't be on either his pro or amateur record. What's wild is that, even back then, Nate still had that awkward movement and unusual striking style that we've seen him use so well. And while that style served Diaz well over the years, it wasn't as effective in the numerous run-ins they've had with Team Khabib. On one side, you've got the gangsters, street fighters, and the Diaz brothers. On the other, the stoic, grappling-heavy team unit of the Dagestani fighters, which at the time was led by Khabib. Already you can see how the two groups wouldn't play nicely. And at a World Series of Fighting event back in 2015, someone made the silly decision of letting Team Diaz sit a little bit too close to Team Khabib. Everything was cordial until, according to Nate, the Russian fighters took a group photo and were laughing at Diaz in the background.
When I ran into him and his team at the World Series of Fighting, they were taking a group picture because I was standing there watching Jake, my friend, fight, and they took a group picture with me behind them just to laugh at me, like make fun of me. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm.
And Nate being Nate, well, he wasn't going to stand for that. Before things really escalated back in the hotel lobby, the two teams had a bit of a scuffle cage side. You can see Nick Diaz getting escorted away while someone tries to attack people of Khabib's team. Regular people were fighting, chairs were getting thrown, and it looked like Nate got a hold of Khabib at one point. In the aftermath, Khabib's team claimed that Nick threw an alcoholic drink over them, which, as a proud Muslim, would have really angered Khabib. Just remember, he didn't even want Conor McGregor's whiskey near him when it was offered to him prior to their fight.
Happy birthday, Shine the Bus.
I don't drink.
Why don't you drink?
I don't drink.
Why don't you drink?
I never drink.
I'd say you're some buzz at parties.
I never drink.
You mad backwards cunt. You're dead when I get my hands on you, do you hear me?
I never
You're
drink.
fucking dead.
I never drink.
I'll drink it. Me and the Irish Boston animal, Dana White, the OG of the fight game. He'll sup this bad boy.
I think it's gonna be a long night for him.
Nate said that he slapped Khabib, and according to all the reports, the Diaz team were waiting in the car park hoping to run into the Dagestanis yet again. But instead of fighting, the next interaction was Khabib taking to his Twitter account to call the Diaz bros thugs. Which now is somewhat ironic after Khabib's rant about street fighting against Tony Ferguson.
This kid's a bully. He's never been in a street fight, never actually been thrown into a trash can or any kind of shit like that. So now you're fucking with somebody that you don't want to. I don't have to bring this.
Sunglasses. In street fight, I can eat you. You understand?
No,
who are you? You never fight in. You American guy. In American, you cannot fight in street.
There we go.
I am from real mountain. I can eat you in street
Here we
fight.
go.
After this whole incident though, the beef between Khabib and the Diaz brothers mostly stayed online. Their only real interaction came 4 years later at a UFC event, and instead of Khabib, it involved Islam Makhachev. And in classic Diaz fashion, he didn't forget about this altercation, because 5 years later they ran into each other backstage, and Diaz had his trusty water bottle in hand. While sadly there was too much age difference between the teams, could you have imagined an alternate universe where there was a UFC pay-per-view that was Nick versus Islam for the 170 title and Nate versus Khabib for the 155? It would have been the craziest fight week in MMA history. But instead, we'll settle for hotel lobby brawls. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to stock and slap the subscribe button, and we'll catch you on the next video.